One of the most common gripes about Survivor, especially in the modern days, is that there's too much focus on twists and advantages and not enough time given to build up characters. And this is especially prevalent to those pre-merge boots. Because in a show that's only an hour long, filled with challenges, twists, and an overall story to tell, it's hard to give good screen time to a fourth boot of a season who doesn't add much to the overall narrative of the season, as opposed to a player who had a massive impact on the season. So when choosing scenes and confessionals to give, it only makes sense that the editors would give more content to the big time players of the season, as opposed to players who lasted 3 episodes. So unfortunately, most pre-merge characters are forgotten about or simply overshadowed by other players from that season. However, sometimes a character is so good that even though they don't make it nearly as far as other players, they have an incredibly memorable Survivor run and are still remembered by Survivor fans to this day, despite not even making it to the merge. So today, let's count down the top 10 best pre-merge characters in Survivor history. Now remember, these are the best characters, not players. So while a player like Tracy would be on the top of that list, as a character, she's nowhere near the caliber as some other pre-mergers. I also won't be including first boots, as there's been plenty of videos done about the greatest first boots in Survivor history. And obviously this list will include players from their first season, so obviously players like Sandra from Game Changers won't make the list, despite her amazing run. And one more thing I'd like to add, I absolutely do think Colton is easily one of the best pre-merge characters ever, but he obviously made some pretty bad remarks out there that I don't want to highlight, so I'll be leaving him off the list. To kick off the list, we have one of the biggest loose cannons to play Survivor, and that is Mr. Alan Ball. It's funny because so many times we see players, especially those who are massive physical threats, say they want to come into the game with a low profile so they don't become too much of a threat. But Alan threw that all out the window when he saw potential showmans in JP and Ashley. Now, the two were simply friends in an alliance, to which Alan was also a part of, yet he was still so paranoid about the two that he made JP strip naked to prove he didn't have an idol. And then he got into it with another hot-headed player in Joe. Joe knew the only way he and Desi could advance further into the game was to play the idol correctly, so he intentionally tried to get under Alan's skin, knowing he was a loose cannon, and throw Ashley under the bus as the weakest, and Alan was having absolutely none of that. Unfortunately for Alan, his personality combined with his threat level made him the target, and he was idled out of the game, as the heroes did in fact put their votes on Joe. I don't know if it was Alan who wanted to get Joe out of the game, or they tried to outthink Joe here, but it's still a shame we lost Alan so early in the game, as he was a complete shock considering most people expected him to be similar to someone like Cliff Robinson. But instead, we got a player who was paranoid of his own alliance to the point where he made JP strip, was extremely upfront, and got into multiple arguments, including an argument that may have led to his downfall. Alan is one of the most underrated pre-merge gems in Survivor history, and it was really close between him and a lot of other potential players to make the list, but his unexpected HHH run was really something, so he lands himself a spot in the top 10. At number 9 is the pace queen herself, Sandy Bergen. And let's be real, I only put her on the list because I don't want her to get mad at me.
Sandy, you can't be happy about this.
I'm pissed. I am so pissed.
But yeah, Sandy had one of the best premieres in Survivor history. She was immediately voted out of her tribe, only to be gifted the ultimate prize in the game in a hidden immunity idol, only to not find it because she didn't know what a pace was. And because she was so outcasted by the tribe, she had no reliable allies to help her find it. Yet despite all this, she was an absolute challenge beast despite being instantly targeted for being weak, and was able to make it past the first tribal council, and in general help Jalapal win challenges. However, she continued to make herself an outcast on Jalapal, and never did find the hidden immunity idol, and was voted out in the next tribal council they attended. Still, you can't deny the humorous impact Sandy provided this season, and is still remembered fondly for her hilarious unintentional attitude and gameplay, despite this season also producing Coach and Tyson. Man, if only she found the idol and made it to the merge, we could have possibly saw Sandy, Coach, and Tyson all interact with each other. At 8 is one of the most upfront players to embrace the villain role, especially in modern day Survivor, and that is Bradley from Survivor Ghost Island. Again, in this day and age, it's a lot easier said than done to be a villain in Survivor, as you'll most likely get hated to death on Twitter the rest of your life. Heck, sometimes Survivor is forced to create villains and people to root against just by the editing. But Bradley didn't care about that, and played like the law student that he was in real life. He was super blunt about the way he played, which made him the target for Malolo after the tribe swap, and didn't show any mercy to the players on the bottom. And Bradley had a mouth, and he liked to show it off to everyone. This way of playing was so out there that it made Bradley a threat to the Core Nvidia alliance, to the point where Dominic and Chelsea through a challenge just to get rid of Bradley before the merge. Bradley is one of the most upfront and blunt players to ever play the game, and is an absolute gem of a pre-merge character. And it's a shame he didn't make it to the merge, because he for sure would have added some excitement to the incredibly bland post-merge, as he was indeed one of the highlights of Ghost Island's pretty good pre-merge. At 7 is one of the greatest arcs in Survivor history, and that is Rob with 2 B's pre-merge arc in Survivor Thailand. One of the only good things about Thailand. I know a lot of people think Xian should be on this list instead, but I feel like Xian is usually unanimously considered as the only good thing in Thailand, and Rob's arc is usually forgotten about, so I want to highlight him. Rob started off the game just as he appeared, a punk skateboard kid who was argumentative with his tribe. And we saw the worst of the worst with him when he choked Clay in the attack zone challenge. But right before his boot, he had an incredible arc where he realized the way he had been treating people and wanted to make amends with his tribe, and had one of the more feel-good moments you'll see on Survivor when he was voted out, wishing nothing but the best for his tribe. It was hard to imagine the same guy who had been shooting insults and starting fights would go on to have one of the most heartwarming exits in Survivor history. And considering it was only the pre-merge, you would think Rob would have stayed the exact same way throughout the game, especially as the elements got to him. But Rob went from looking and acting like a complete tool to a great teammate and supporter of his tribe, all within 18 days. Truly one of the best arcs in Survivor, and easily the best pre-merge arc for a player, and is definitely one of the best things to come from Thailand. At 6 is the most recent player, and a player who inspired me to make this list, as I wanted to give some credit to all the amazing pre-merge characters we've had over the years, with Brad Reese from season 41 absolutely being one of them. Sure, he wasn't a great player, but man, was his antics absolutely awesome to watch. In episode 1, he literally told Sarah and Chantel to their face that they were the targets, an absolutely dumbfounding move, especially for season 41. And it almost cost him the game, as his name came up at Tribal, and if say Sarah had an idol or played her shot in the dark, that could have potentially cost him as well, since she obviously knew her name was on the chopping block thanks to Brad. In episode 2, after simply seeing a conversation between Ricard and JD, he got extremely paranoid and created his own little spy shack, while at the same time making it very clear to the other players what he was doing. Then in episode 3, he found both Beware advantages, and after completely messing up his broccoli line at the Muni Challenge, he was blindsided by Shan and Ricard, and his short but crazy run came to an end. Now, obviously, it's pretty funny that Brad basically got all the screen time in episode 3 due to that episode basically being all about advantages, but it didn't end up mattering at all since he was the one to go home. But I think it also goes to show that you don't necessarily need advantages all the time to make great TV when you have players like Brad, who yes, even though he went home early, is an insanely great character, and was a great character despite his entire game basically being all about dilemmas and advantages. It just goes to show how important a cast truly is, and I'm glad we got to see so much of Brad, even though his advantages ended up not mattering. And it's a shame we might not have got to see as much of him had another person got those advantages in this twist-heavy era of Survivor. Number 5 is a bit of a gray area, as this person got even more time on screen than most despite being the 4th boot, but in the game and out of it, he was amazing TV, and that is Brad Culpepper. Man, what is it about being named Brad that makes you a great pre-merge character? Like I said with Alan, pro athletes and celebrities in general usually aren't the type to play hard and be a big-time player. But after getting advice from his wife Monica, who ironically did nothing in One World, and making a potential big-time mistake at the very start of the game, saying he would give up his game for Monica over the others, Brad knew he had to take control of his tribe right away, and boy, did he ever. After Marissa was mad at some of the comments he made, he used Jervis celebrating as an excuse to get rid of Marissa, and unbelievably, got the entire tribe on board to vote her off due to Jervis's comments, despite Marissa only being a threat to Brad. He then voted off Rachel in hopes of getting Tyson to take her place, and blindsided John for being a massive threat and potentially having an idol. And, well, these moves did not exactly sit well with their loved ones.
Okay, I'm staying.
Let's go, Rachel.
You guys
go,
watch
Rachel.
out, because if you see me in Redemption Island, none of you have a chance in hell. Mr. Football over there smiling at me like he does.
You know, she and I could work together to be
Somebody you could hate.
somebody I could hate, like Brad Culpepper.
After basically getting crapped on by everyone and being seen as too dominating, Caleb finally made the decision to flip on the Guys Alliance, and Brad was voted out. He did, however, take out Candace at the duel, which was pretty funny after everything she said to him, but eventually lost to John and Laura in the next duel. Still, for basically everyone to hate a man despite Brad having the majority alliance just goes to show how much of a domineering figure he was out there, and his intense personality definitely came across on screen. And he was the main one to make Blood vs. Water such an amazing concept, and brought the most out of players who we had never seen such emotion from. No matter what you think of Culpepper, you can't deny the impact he had on Blood vs. Water, and was definitely more of a game changer than half the Game Changers cast who made it farther than him, and is definitely one of the most notorious pre-merge villains ever. At 4 is Miss Natalie Cole, an absolute gem of a pre-merge character. Now, taking one look at Natalie, you wouldn't think of a near 60-year-old woman to be a villain and argumentative. But my oh my, was she that and then some out there. She immediately got on everyone's nerves 3 days into the game, and her upfront and petty personality turned off the entire tribe, and she would have been the first boot of the season had the Goliaths gone to the first tribal. However, by the time the Goliaths finally went to tribal, she had a new target on her hands, and that was Jeremy. And the two had an iconic one-episode arc in episode 3, completely going after each other, with Natalie being absolutely hilarious about it the entire time. But in the end, Natalie got the best of Jeremy, as she went from being a potential first boot to having the entire tribe unanimously vote out her arch nemesis. After the tribe swap, she was up in numbers with arguably the two best allies she could have had, in Mike, who was also on the bottom with Natalie the first couple days, and Angelina, the person who ultimately got the target off Natalie's back and onto Jeremy's. So I guess because of this, Angelina felt like Natalie owed her. Yes, in one of the most iconic moments in recent Survivor history, Angelina faked her vote for Lyrsa, even though she was all in on getting rid of Natalie, in hopes that Natalie would give her her jacket. And, well, you know how it goes.
Natalie, is there any way I could have your jacket? Natalie?
Natalie, the tribe has spoken.
Thank you, Joe.
Natalie?
Time for you to go.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Is it worth $1 million?
Guess not.
Natalie has to be one of the most on-paper unexpected villains in Survivor history, as she had some incredibly snarky one-liners, and didn't even give one word to Angelina with regards to her jacket. Simply an iconic pre-merge run. The next pre-merge boot was only a pre-merge boot because they put themselves in that position. Yes, at number 3 is Drew Christie, the man to have arguably the greatest downfall episode in Survivor history. His tribe was absolutely dominating the season, but for some reason, Drew was completely scared of Kelly Wentworth and was afraid of a girls' alliance despite the men having more numbers. But nonetheless, Drew was all about getting Kelly out and literally put it into his own hands to throw the immunity challenge to get rid of Kelly. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, this didn't work. In fact, Drew was so bad socially and showed so much paranoia that the majority of votes were put on him, despite Keith being outed as a liar and Julie far and away being the weakest link. But despite this, Drew was seen as the most problematic and was voted out after he literally threw the challenge. Not only is this episode one of the greatest downfall episodes ever, but one of the greatest pre-merge episodes in general. But that's not all when it comes to Drew. He's one of the few players in Survivor history to negotiate with Jeff Probst, as since he was going completely insane out there, he and the rest of Hanapu were eating all the rice, and he was willing to make a deal to get more rice, much to the amusement of everyone, especially Jeff. Drew also became known for, well, being attracted to the tales of women. I mean, he was a self-proclaimed womanizer after all. And don't forget, his prediction of Kelly Wentworth came true, albeit it was 2 seasons later, but still, Drew Christie warned them. So despite all the craziness from Drew, in the end, maybe he had the right to be paranoid about Kelly, as she proved to be a massive threat after all. But whether you think Drew is a low-key genius or one of the worst Survivor players ever, everyone can agree he is one of the best pre-merge characters in Survivor history. At number 2 is not only one of the best pre-merge characters in Survivor history, but one of the greatest challenge beasts in Survivor history. Yeah, just kidding. At number 2 is Jatia Taylor. Jatia still remains an iconic name to this day, even among casuals, for just how much of a train wreck run she had on Survivor. Obviously, she is one of, if not the worst competitor in Survivor history. I mean, she was on the Brains tribe, yet blew a humongous lead on the puzzle part of the challenge, the part where you would think she would thrive. Plus, the Bronze literally tried to throw a challenge, but Jatia was so bad in that challenge that they couldn't continue to make it so obvious, and beat the Brains in the challenge that they wanted to lose. And she completely wasted the entire tribe's rice, even though she was the one that was costing them the challenges. But despite all this craziness, Jatia made it past not one, but 2 tribal councils. David completely overplayed the first 3 days, making him the first boot. And in the second tribal, despite literally costing the Brains a challenge and wasting all their rice, she made better bonds once again, and got Cass to flip to her side, despite Cass literally telling Jatia to her face she wanted her gone 3 days prior. However, Jatia's game finally came to an end on day 11, as Tasha and Cass simply couldn't risk losing another challenge, and voted her out. But still, in 4 episodes, Jatia pretty much became unanimously considered the worst challenge player in Survivor history, even being considered worse than people like Dan, a 60-year-old man who had the entire season to show off how terrible he was. She went completely psycho on her tribe, and yet despite all this terrible gameplay, she damn near made it to the tribe swap, and could have easily made a long run at that point. But even in such a short run, Jatia made an everlasting impact on Survivor. And lastly, at number 1, in my opinion, this person not only is the best pre-merge character ever, but this guy literally is a Survivor game changer, and that is Cowboy from Survivor Cook Islands. I mean, has anyone ever had a bigger impact in their short stay on Survivor? The dude cracked Asian jokes, told stories nonstop, and literally made fun of his own culture in a season dedicated to diversity. And in general, Cowboy is simply one of the most lighthearted players in Survivor history, as it seemed like he was just out there to laugh and have a good time, and didn't care one bit about winning. I mean, the guy was, as he puts it, a middle-aged Asian nail salon manager, who didn't fit any sort of stereotype whatsoever. Yet despite his laid-back attitude, he changed the course of Survivor history with his amazing strategy. In the Cook Islands, Cowboy would practice voodoo on his tribe mates, as it even helped Brad with his migraine, much to the shock of his tribe, showing that Cowboy wasn't all that dumb. And at the final 15, Cowboy was worried that Candace had an idol. And with this being the super idol, Candace could become a very powerful player at the merge. So after a dream, he told the tribe of Plan Voodoo, and that the 6 should put 3 votes on Candace and 3 votes on Jonathan. If Candace didn't have an idol, she would go home. If she did, then Jonathan would go home, and the idol would be out of the game. Getting the idol out of the game, while also having a secondary target to keep everyone else safe, was absolutely genius. So genius that this strategy still exists in Survivor today, now simply called the split vote strategy. This was scary to Yul, who was in fact the one to have the idol, and decided that the tribe should gun for Cowboy instead, unbelievably for being a strategic threat. So not only was Cowboy an absolute star of a character, as he was so different from the norm, but he was absolutely hilarious and had no filter whatsoever. He changed Survivor forever with the split vote strategy, to the point where one of the greatest strategical players ever in Yule saw him as a threat and blindsided him. Cowboy was a 10 out of 10 character and a legit Survivor game changer, which makes him the greatest pre-merger in Survivor history. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what you see, then hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know down in the comments what kind of Survivor videos you would like to see from me in the future, whether that may be top 10 list, rankings, analyst, or whatever else you may be interested in. But until then, have a good one, guys.